Welcome to episode 45 of Soul Care with Stevie Boy. We're in the book of Philippians still, but we're making progress. And last episode, we finished up this terrific list of 8 things Paul says to think about. Think about such things. These are broad categories. But when we think about these things, they can set our heart and mind in a place that the peace of Christ, the peace of God, can guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So then Paul goes on and he says, this is verse 9, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Start at the end and work our way back. The God of peace will be with you. See, that's kind of a theme that Paul talks about. He in the book of Philippians, maybe the big word would be rejoice, but right beneath that, I think, peace. He's talked about the peace of God that will guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. His greeting was grace and peace to you from God our Father. Well, now he's back to peace. And there's a lot of things that I love to say about peace. And one of the things is that when Paul uses the word peace here, he's not talking about the kind of peace that most Americans think about. For most Americans, when we think about peace, we think about the cessation of conflict, or the absence of conflict, or the opposite of conflict. And that is only a piece of what Paul would have talked about when he talks about peace. There is more to it. And a big part of the more to it is the Hebrew origins and the Hebrew thought about peace. Hebrew's word was shalom. It was their greeting, their hello and goodbye, kind of like aloha. I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to harp on it, except this peace is perfect. This peace is complete. Nothing can be added to it that would make it any better. That's the idea of shalom. Shalom is a wholeness, a fullness, a goodness that is so good and so full that nothing needs to be added to it. In fact, nothing could be added to it. Wouldn't you like to have that kind of peace in your heart? Boy, I would. I struggle, I've told you before, with anxiety. And the opposite of anxiety is peace. Well, he says, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me. Wow. When I think about that, that's a pretty big deal. It's like, I don't know if I can say that, because there are times when I don't really want you to see me doing that or hear me say that. It's kind of, you don't need that in your life. Hey, this is very parental. Isn't this what a Christian parent would want for their kids? Now, we realize that we can't, and Paul realized that he couldn't say, I'm perfect at all this, I'm spot on, you're not going to do better than me, I'm the standard, I am the gold standard. That's not what he's saying. I think what he's saying is a thing that parents need to be ready to say to their kids. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice. See, here's the deal. Parents, if you don't already know this, you need to know this. Your kids are doing what they hear and what they see. A lot of parents kind of don't believe that about themselves or about their kids. I know a lot of parents who feel like their kids' role model is somebody way better, bigger, smarter than they are. I don't think that's very often the case. I think your kids are looking into your life. You, by your actions, by your words, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me. There's so many venues for passing on values to our kids. And honestly, James Dobson was right. He said values are more often caught than taught. I find that's true. I have 3 grown daughters that are my 3 heroes in life, that are awesome women who love God and are bright, brilliant. I couldn't do better. They got to be the way they are by God's grace, and in partnership, God's grace worked with my wife Debbie and I as we guided them toward character and values in their life. They didn't grow up in a morally neutral environment. I don't know that very many people do. I think there are people who say that they want to raise their kids in a morally neutral environment to let their children decide for themselves. I think that's just silly. I don't think, pretty sure that science won't ever support that. Well, Paul is saying to the people he loved so dearly in Philippi, he said, think back, whatever I taught you, whatever you learned from me, whatever you heard from me, and whatever you saw in me, do those things. Imitate me. Wow. Now, I see that as a principle and a goal. I think it should be the goal of every Christian to desire to live their life in a way that when people would imitate them, they would be drawing closer to Christ. I mean, imitating me, my dream, my desire is that I would live in such a way that if you imitate me, your life will be better. Now, Paul doesn't even indicate that he's perfect. I know I am way not perfect. And there are a lot of times when my motto, whether I say it or not, is probably do as I say, not as I do. You know what? Paul didn't accept that. He said, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me. That's pretty much it. That's all of who he is. Put it into practice. Now I'm going to thump on this for a little while. Put it into practice. I think the church suffers from the lack or deficiency of vitamin P. I think the church often suffers from the lack of the practice vitamin. When I was in high school, had a band director. Oh, he was harsh. And he seemed mean, but you know what? We had the best band in the state. And what he would say, you're suffering from the disease. You know the disease, lack of practicitis. And what he meant was, you better take your horn home and practice, or you better stay late in the band room and practice, but you got to practice if you're going to get any good. There's a thing about life. Whatever you practice is what you will become. If we put into practice what we know, there's a future in that. There's a good future in that. Don't you remember what Paul said? Let us live up to what we have already attained. I think what he's saying is put it into practice. You already know that I have this big drum I beat all the time on application. Paul didn't say, I want you to know all the things I know so you'll be smart. What he said was, I want you to put into practice what you have seen in me, what you have heard from me, what I've passed on to you, what I have taught you. I want you to put it into practice. Now here's the rub. Putting what you know into practice is not always easy. It often is very difficult. So you have to strap your seatbelt on and realize this is not going to be just one of those hi-ho happy things. It could be difficult. Here's the other thing about this. It's very difficult to practice what you don't know. You already know, because I've told you a few times, my love for golf. And one of the interesting things to me about golf is that you don't get good at it without practice. I've known some people who are just very gifted natural athletes, but you put a golf club in their hand and it feels like nothing they've ever had, and their swing is hilarious and awful when they first try it. But the more you do it, the better you get. But here's the thing. Unless you have somebody who can help you figure out what is the best thing to do in that golf swing. If you don't have somebody to teach you, you'll only keep doing all the things that you've been doing and likely to get all the things you've been getting. Does that seem like life to you? Because it is what life is about. If you keep doing what you've always been doing, you'll get the same results that you've always been getting. In recovery terms, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is insanity. So there's that side of the coin. If you're not getting what you want, then think about what you're doing, because you're probably getting what you're doing will get you. Now here's the other side I'm coming back to. When you know whatever you know, and there's a very wide, broad field of application for this. I'm thinking specifically about your walk with Christ. Whatever you know about Him, His ways, God's design, His mercy, His plan, and His commands, put that into practice. Do you have to wait until you know everything there is to know? No. Paul didn't say, everything I taught you, everything you received from me, everything you heard, and everything you saw. He just said, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice. You don't have to know the whole thing. Yeah, you have to know a bit, but the key is that I put into practice what I know. And this will, in my life, this has spurred me on to learn more. And then there is more to practice. I think one of the ways that I would describe the maturing Christian life is that I keep learning more and I keep putting more into practice. That's a picture of a mature person. I just have recently been in a little bit of a training situation, and the idea of lifelong learning came up. I believe in lifelong learning, and I'm committed to lifelong learning on lots of different levels. One of the ways that I'm committed to lifelong learning is that I want to always learn more and more about the nature of God, the love of Christ, His grace, His peace, and how that can be worked out in my life. I want to practice what I know, and I want to know more and more and more. Well, we're going to stop there for today because I want to talk about the application of this. The application is not easy. The application requires self-reflection. First of all, take a broad look and ask yourself, am I putting into practice what I know about how God desires for me to live? That's probably not a yes or no question. Most of us have places we would say yes and places we'd have to say no. Well, I want you to examine your life, reflect on it. And then I want you to pick out only one area in your life where you know you must put into practice what you know about God and His design. That's what I got this time, folks. And look at this. I'm coming in under 15. Hot diggity. I hope I get to connect with you again next time for Soul Care with Stevie Boy.